Welcome on into the Third Down Analysis podcast. I am your host, Danny Jackson, founder and creator of ThirdDownAnalysis.com. And today I'm going to be taking you through BYU's schedule and ranking their 12 games from easiest to hardest. Thank you for listening today. If you like the content, I would encourage you to please like it and subscribe. However you do that on YouTube or on Apple or Spotify, whatever the mechanisms are to liking and subscribing. And share it if you will, if you find the content insightful. That really helps to spread the word there. Also, leave a comment in YouTube or you can email me support@thirddownanalysis.com. I'd love to hear feedback and comments. Love to hear your thoughts as well on the content here and what you think, particularly about BYU's schedule, which is what I'm going to be walking through. Now, before I do that, I'm going to do my ad. Not my ad. I'm going to do my pun read because I don't have ads. So, the first pun read up here today is Confucius say, "Man who runs behind car will get exhausted, but man who runs in front of car will get tired." I thought that one was hilarious. So today, like I mentioned, I'm going to take you through BYU's schedule, and this is going to be a fun one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through from easiest to hardest, and it's going to be. So I'm going to put up on screen here. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify and you're not able to view that, or if you're listening to YouTube and you're in the car driving and you don't want to watch, which is a good idea because it's better to watch the road, then I'm going to put out some of this material on Twitter. You can, or I guess X, you can find me at DJ Danny Jackson. Eventually I'll also put this together in some kind of article on ThirdDownAnalysis.com. So starting from the easiest game is Southern Illinois. So that's number 12. That's, I think, BYU's easiest schedule or easiest game. It is the opener. It's at home. What's going to be interesting to see is if they are able to have an easier go this round than they did against Sam Houston last year. That was a difficult starter. And I was on the bandwagon initially of saying, give it some time. I know that they struggled to run the ball, but they were replacing a lot on their offense. And it come to find out it was a sign of bad things to come. So this year, I'm likely going to flip to the other side and say, if they are struggling in a particular area of the game, in this game, then that is going to be a sign of things that they're going to struggle with for the entire season. It is possible for teams to improve throughout the season, but generally what's more common is you see pieces of teams that might improve throughout the season, but generally teams are kind of who they are when they are what they are when they come into the season. Now, if BYU looks phenomenal against Southern Illinois, I'm going to take that as good. They did what we would expect them to do. Doesn't mean that they have an amazing offense. Doesn't mean that they have an amazing defense. Now, I will say one thing I did observe from last year against Sam Houston was their defense was really good. And their defense was much better than it was in 2022. So there will be trends that we can take away from this game. But overall, the biggest thing here is get the victory at home. Enough said there. Number 11, I have the last game of the year. That's a home game against Houston. Now, here's why I think this is going to be the next easiest game, or the 11th hardest game, if you will. It's at the end of the season, so both teams are still in the middle of their G5/Independence to P4 transition. Houston has the added element of going through a new head coach. So they brought in Willie Fritz from Tulane. And I think he's got potential there long term to turn Houston into a really competitive program. But I think that's going to be really hard first year. They did lose some key pieces out of the transfer portal to Colorado and to Texas. They lost a receiver, Matthew Golden, to Texas. And so now they do return their quarterback, Donovan Smith. But given that this is at the end of the year, I think that their depth is still going to be less than BYU. Well, less than what you would hope. Not necessarily less than BYU's, but that plus, I think that they're obviously going to be struggling with injuries. Both teams will, but given that this one's at home, that's why I give BYU the advantage. Plus, again, the fact that Houston is still going to be in year one of really Willie Fritz. Okay, now the 10th hardest game that I've got is the road game at Wyoming. This is the third game of the year. I went back and forth on this one because I have BYU winning this game right now, but I do think that this is going to be a more difficult game than what you would look at the surface. Now, I think a lot of BYU fans are really aware of the dynamic that Wyoming hates BYU. Laramie does not like BYU. So I do expect a hostile environment, perhaps more hostile than usual. Given it's the third game of the year, where I think the difficulty here is going to come in. Yes, it's going to be on the road, but secondly, it's going to be the quarterback position. I think there is a chance at this point that whomever A-Rod and Kalani select to go into game one will not be performing amazingly because you've got SMU coming up game two and then a tough game at Wyoming. So I wouldn't be shocked if there is chatter amongst fans or even amongst the coaching staff as to which quarterback is going to see the most time here. And you could see a scenario where if whomever starts, let's say it's Retzlaff, let's say he's struggling a little bit. Well, it would not be shocked if Bohannon comes in and gets some time here. I do, like I said, I have BYU winning that game. Wyoming is also going to be going through a new head coach. Their old coach, Craig Bull, retired. He had been there for quite a while, was a bit of a legend at Wyoming. So they're also going to be going through a transition, and catching them earlier in the season is of more benefit to BYU just by having to go on the road. So I like BYU there, but I do think that one is going to be a tricky one. Now, what is not explicit in these ratings here is that I think this is a very difficult schedule in general for BYU. Their non-conference schedule is a harder one. Technically, SMU is now Power 4. You could say that they're quasi-Power 4 because they just came from the G5 last year. But the fact that they've got two road games that are going to be really difficult, I think that that's kind of the equivalent of playing a pretty solid Power 5 team, or well, I guess Power 4. So nonetheless, that 10th hardest game I think is still a hard game. Okay, now I've got, at number 9, I've got Arizona State. I went back and forth between Arizona State and Wyoming on this one. Ultimately, Arizona State, they were not good last year, and they have a lot of things going. I mean, they have had quarterbacks going in and out the door. Jaden Rashada, who came in last year, he is now gone. Jacob Conover, whom BYU fans will remember from a few years ago, he has also left, gone to Utah State. They brought in a quarterback from Michigan State. I want to say Sam Levitt or Dallin Levitt. I forget. Forgive me if I don't remember the name exactly. But so nonetheless, they've got a lot going on here. Their defense was okay. Their offense was not great last year. They gave up some big plays. Went back and watched some of their film. Their DBs gave up some pretty big broken coverage type plays. So what's going to be interesting here is they've hit the transfer portal pretty hard. Kenny Dillingham really needs to show some progress. And this is going to be the second to last game of the year. It's on the road. I think this has the potential for one of two outcomes. Either A, a trap game, or B, BYU gets a much needed victory by 10 to 14 points. So I think that one's going to be a fun one to watch. BYU is likely going to fill much of the stadium. So I would not be shy. Obviously, it's Arizona, so huge BYU population down there. I would not be surprised to see a lot of the stadium rooting for BYU there. Okay, now number 8, this one's going to be at Baylor. This is the BYU's 5th game of the year. This one, for me, could be one of two. So Baylor's going to be either a dumpster fire already at that point, and Dave Aranda's going to be on the hot seat. They could be like a 1-4 situation, or you could see them coming back. Now, I actually think that Baylor's going to finish somewhere. I forget off the top of my head now. I had them finishing somewhere around 7-5 or 8-4. I do think that they're going to rebound a little bit. That's a little bit of me hoping for Dave Aranda, but it's also part of me thinking that they do have a decent amount of talent on the roster. They're going through a coaching change on the offensive side. Jeff Grimes is no longer there, as BYU fans will know. So I didn't want to say it was Cal. I did some season prediction on this and research, but now it's escaping me. But I want to say it was Cal's offensive coordinator that they brought in. I know if you're listening and you want to fact check me on that, please do that. That would be great. So it's in Waco. That's going to be a hard place for BYU to play anyways. A lot of BYU fans are going to love going down there because Waco's awesome. My wife and I have been down there a few times. We went to the Baylor game in 21. That was both a frustrating and a phenomenal experience. So the reason why this one is really hard to me, again, Baylor has talent. They haven't put it together. They lacked tenacity and grit last year. I went back and watched several of their games, and they, in 21, when they manhandled BYU and they won the Big 12, they were fierce and pretty tough. Last year, it looked like they were getting pushed over, and that's all relative because all football players are obviously strong, but nonetheless. If Baylor, we'll know by then at that point if Baylor has regained their grit and their physicality, or if BYU actually has a shot to go down there. Now, I have BYU losing the game right now because it's on the road. If that was a home game, I would have BYU winning it. But nonetheless, I think that's going to be difficult for BYU. They're going into a bye week right after that as well, which then leads them to my next game. They go Baylor, bye, and then they have Arizona at home. Now, Arizona I have as the 7th ratest. I am not as high on Arizona as everyone else is. So they bring back the quarterback and the receiver. Noah Fafita and Tetaroa McMillan are phenomenal. Noah didn't play he played in parts of the early part of the game, but Jaden DeLora was the starter for most of the season, or for the early half of the season. So, and Noah found a great target in McMillan, but my concern for Arizona is the running game, and then they did lose a decent amount to the portal because Jed Fish left. So, again, It's a wild card when you bring in a new head coach. I know we've seen some examples, even in the Big 12, like Sonny Dykes at TCU, or you think about Louisville last year and Jeff Brom. So there are coaches who can come in and can get things spun up real quickly, but I think it's more common in most places where you need another year. Now, Arizona's a unique example because they did do really well last year, and if they turn out to win 10 games this year, then I will stand corrected. But I gave this number 7 because they do have a good amount of talent. It's coming off of the bye, so that's why you're going to see now the BYU's toughest opponents. I have Arizona as one of the further games down in terms of difficulty. I think they'll have 2 weeks to prepare for the game, to rest, to recover. And so for those reasons, and Arizona has actually got a decently difficult schedule as well. They play Kansas State in the third week, and that's not even a conference game because that was already scheduled. So there you go. Now, number 6, this one's at SMU. This one's surprising, probably for some of you, why that would be in front of Arizona. But it's the road factor. It's the second week of the year factor. It's a Friday night game, so one less day to prepare. And SMU was good last year. They beat Tulane in the AAC championship game, and their quarterback is returning. I want to say his name is Preston Stone. So I think they're going to be sneaky good, and I think they will be competitive in the ACC, which is going to be something to watch. So I think BYU is going to lose this game because they're still going to be figuring out who their quarterback is. Their offensive line is still going to be figuring out who they are. And when you've got a returning quarterback and you're playing at home second week of the season on a Friday night, I think that a lot of the cards fall in favor of SMU for this game. So I think that one's going to be a really difficult one. Now, number 5, I have this one at UCF. To me, this one is difficult for 4 reasons. First, it's a new opponent. We haven't played UCF. We haven't played against Gus Malzahn, so I don't know what to expect there. Second, it's all the way across the country at a place that apparently goes bonkers. From what I have seen on TV and what I've heard, that place goes bananas. It's not the largest stadium, but they don't call it the bounce house for nothing, I guess. And I think UCF is a really up-and-coming program. Leads me to the third reason why I think this one's going to be tough is they were either the best or the second best rushing team in the league last year. I've got this data somewhere else, but I'm not going to pull that up right now. But they were second best. They had they averaged over 5 yards per carry on the ground. Now, BYU was good last year against they were okay last year against the run. They weren't great, but they were okay. So it's not like this is the 2022 team that couldn't stop the run for the life of them. But I don't like that factor. And then the fourth factor here is KJ Jefferson. He has played against BYU twice now. The first game, he absolutely shredded BYU. The second game, he struggled a bit more, and that was really more because his offensive line was really struggling, and he didn't have his best running back, Rocket Sanders. So UCF's got RJ Harvey, who is a baller, and I tend to think that KJ Jefferson is going to have a good game. Jay Hill will have the benefit of having played against him, but RJ Harvey will also know the BYU defense a little bit better now, having played against it. So I think that one's going to be a really hard game. It falls at a somewhat favorable time for BYU though, because so that lessens the difficulty. But they've got the bye week, the first week of October, and then they've got Arizona at home, and then they've got Oklahoma State at home. And that's on a Friday night, and then they go to UCF the following week on October 26th. So what's nice is that they're going to be home for quite a while. They are going to play some difficult teams coming up before, and so that's not necessarily going to make it easy, but we'll see. Okay, now the number 4, the fourth hardest game I've got here is Oklahoma State. I went back and forth on this one. BYU played Oklahoma State really well last year. I don't know if they'll do the same thing or not this year, because last year they just, in listening to some of the players and the coaches, by the end of the year they felt like they had nothing to lose, and so they finally played a bit more loose. This one's coming in the middle of the year. It's on a Friday night. I think the crowd is going to be pumped for this one, and what I don't know is I don't know if Oklahoma State's going to build off of what they did last year, and they are going to legitimately be a 10-2, 11-1, 12-0. Well, they're not going to be 12-0, but a 10-2, 11-1 team. Or are they going to have their bumps and their bruises that come every now and again? because it's a Friday night game, because it's at Lavelle Edwards, I think that this is one of those where BYU, if healthy enough, could be really juiced and make it really competitive. So that's why I didn't quite put it up to number 3, number 2, or number 1. Now, the next two, you may guess because you probably are guessing where number 1's going to go. But here I've got Kansas. Kansas to me is the of the top tier teams. They are the least referenced in what I see generally by fans and by media. But if you go through their schedule, if they are healthy, and predominantly if Jalen Daniels is healthy, Kansas is going to be in the Big 12 title game because they have one of the easiest schedules in the conference. They have one of the more favorable schedules in the conference, and they have quite a bit returning back. I know that their production numbers, I think it's like the 80th most returning production. So in that sense, they did lose a lot, but some of their key players, right? Some of their key stars on defense, their corners, and then obviously Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal in the run. Devin Neal could have gone to the NFL, certainly. I don't know yet about Jalen Daniels, but I do think he's one of the easily top 5 quarterbacks in the league. When he's on, I think he could be a top 3 most dynamic. That doesn't mean I think he's going to go to the NFL and be dynamic per se, but boy, he was really difficult for BYU to stop last year. So, and he's a different kind of runner. I think he is a pass first quarterback who's extremely athletic and is willing to make you pay with the run, but I don't think he is dependent on being a runner in order to open up everything for him. And that makes it hard to defend because you have to honestly defend the pass, and he's good in the passing game. He was very accurate in his games that he played. Now, he didn't play a ton of last year, but he was one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league. But then it's hard to really. It reminds me of Jaron Hall, honestly, where you have to think about, do I need to spy on this guy? Because if the coverage is good, then he's fast enough to really make you pay and easily pick up 15, 20, 25 yards. Okay, enough about Kansas. Now, the one thing about Kansas, I will say, Jalen Daniels has struggled to be healthy. So if he is not healthy, the game's still going to be difficult, but that lessens the difficulty, and I would actually drop that difficulty. I wouldn't put it at number 3. But that one's going to be hard because it's coming right after Utah, and it's the third to the last game of the year. And the Kansas game is the last of what I call BYU's brutal stretch, which is most of the season, but it starts with Kansas State. So I think Kansas State and Kansas are your bookends to what I think is going to be a very difficult part, potentially BYU's most difficult schedule, because it's all P4 and they're all really good. They legitimately, each one of these teams, minus the UCF, in this stretch from Kansas and Baylor, from Kansas State to Kansas, have a shot to get to Arlington in the Big 12 title game. Kansas State, why I think this is hard. Avery Johnson, their quarterback, is getting quite a bit of buzz for a guy who could really get himself in some serious conversations by the end of the year. I know they have to replace quite a bit of offensive line, but their offensive line has had, I want to say they've led the league. I forget the stat exactly. I put it in my season predictions for them, but it was something to the effect of, for the last 4 to 6 years, they've had less than 2 sacks per game that they've allowed, or no, less than 1 sack per game. 2 sacks isn't super great, but it was either that or they led the league in the least amount of sacks. I forget, but nonetheless, they've had a good offensive line. They've got a good coach at offensive line. He still is there. So. And then Colin Klein, they're building something there. I think between both the Kansas and the Kansas States, I know they've lost some coordinators, but the head coach is there, and they're really building something special at those schools. And Kansas State, why I think that's hard is because that's Big 12 opener. It is at home, so that helps BYU. But the quarterback position, I'm not confident in, and whomever is playing, it is still going to be going through some figuring things out, some growing pains. If it's Jake, I think he's going to still be going through some growing pains. If it's Gary, I think he's still going to be adapting to the offense and whatnot. And Kansas State had a really good defense last year, and BYU, as we know, struggled. I'm concerned about the receiving core for BYU in the sense that while they're all really solid, I think they're all a bunch of really solid 2 or 3, like 2s or 3s. They didn't have a really solid number 1 in each consistently. Chase Roberts or Darius Lassiter, who could be your number 1 for a game or 2. So that concerns me as a BYU fan, and for the receiving core. And that's a theme that's going to go throughout the season, but I call it out there against Kansas State. Now, the last game, as you might have expected, I think it has to be at Utah, because Utah is a really good program. I also have them in the Big 12 title game. So Cam Rising is coming back for his 700th season, and he might stay next year for his 701st season. We'll see. It's at Rice Eccles, and it's a rivalry game, and it's going to be the first time they've played since 21, and it's in conference. So I think the emotions, particularly the emotions among the fans, are going to be very, very fluid and on edge. If you think about the players, a lot of the players have turned over now, so it's not like they're going to have the vitriol from having played each other the last year, but nonetheless, they know it's a rivalry game. So it falls at kind of a wonky time, right? It's in November 9th, but and I think, if I remember right, both teams are coming off of a bye, so they'll get some time to prepare, which is only going to give 2 weeks for fans on both sides to be really inundated with trash talk towards the other. But I'm excited to see this game back on the schedule, and like I said, I think it's going to be the hardest, but because it's a rivalry game, because it's Utah, I think BYU has a chance to win it. It's going to be their offense is going to have to play decent, like well, because I think the defense is, while it's going to be good, Utah with Cam Rising is going to be a challenging offense. So that's what I've got. That's what I've got for you today. Thanks for listening in, and drop a comment. Like I mentioned, like, subscribe. Appreciate the feedback. Support at thirddownanalysis.com. And would be curious to hear what your rankings are of the 12 games, how you would rate them.